an NSF NIE grant available. I had 3 days to write the proposal. I did it, and I did something kind of sneaky, and it's still a good idea, which was, it was for logic and geometry for young, gifted, black dialect-speaking children. And I threw that in just because everyone on there, just about every review said, that's very interesting about logic and geometry, but they'd put in tiny letters at the bottom, there aren't any gifted black dialect-speaking children. Or, I don't like that part about black dialect. And I got the idea because my programmer was Italian, and he'd say, above, below. You know? I thought, oh, if you're recording voice, it could be any kind of voice. And I just wanted to help my kids in East Buffalo. I still do. They just ring true to me. Their little faces looking at me like, please teach me, when there's kind of chaos going on around them in so many ways in their life. So I won that grant, beating out UC Berkeley and a whole bunch of other people, which was thrilling. And that let me hire the first two people, Robinett and Teri Perl. And we had $130,000 to work with, which was a fortune at that time. Steve Jobs, my partner was Steve Jobs' girlfriend. And he wrote our first spreadsheet. You know, he started Apple. And Dan Foster started Personal Software, the largest and most interesting software company, did the first spreadsheet, VisiCalc. And he wanted to help me, but he said, I gave him my business card, I was the president, and he said, I'd feel better if you had one line of code. I was the president of nobody. And Mitch Kapoor, who started Lotus, flew all night to meet with him and said he had some graphics that turned into the graphical part of spreadsheets. And he said, you need a programmer, and he introduced me to Warren. Warren asked endless questions. I sat on the floor, and I think he asked me questions for 6 hours. I just wore out and sat on the floor, and well, we were looking at a new office that had no furniture. And he did the breakthrough work, really, of everything that I'm associated with. He wrote, at Atari, he wrote Adventure in 4K. Now that's so small that he had to think of putting things in teeny tiny code. And he made a game where you could go off the edge of the screen and be in a new room. And for me, he made 64 rooms you could go to, and it's like a giant map. If you look at something and you cover it up, like if you turn a page, you're not thinking about the page underneath. But if you put your pages like this, you can think about all of them, even if you're only seeing this much at a time. And so that was one of his breakthroughs. So he made a program called Rocky's Boots that will come up in another slide. And he said, Ann, you are like a chocolate-covered steel bolt. I act really nice, but underneath, I'm very determined. We got a lot of press. I had 300 interviews a year when I hired Regis McKenna as our PR agency, and we only had 3 people in the company. I had a stack of letters once, 5,000 letters. I only know by sort of estimating how high the stack was. And I was invited to speak for a member of parliament in England, and it was just a tiny, tiny company with almost no funding. Jack Melchior gave us $300,000, and it was because of Tom Whitney being on the Apple board. Warren had alligators chasing and eating a cursor, but no use for these logic gates on the screen. They were and, or, and not, and he drew them in the air. And I didn't really get what they were, but he said and, or, and not are what every piece of hardware and software in the entire world are made of. And I thought, children should know that. That's like the ABCs. So we made something for little 7-year-old kids to learn about that. When my daughter Sarah played it, she crawled under the table and screamed because the alligators were eating the cursor. And the kids don't know reality from fantasy when they're really little. And they don't understand that they're really okay. So we have to always think about that in what we give children. So I said to Warren, let's explain what each of these gates does and make a way to use them and then put them together and make things harder. So he made 64 games, each a little bit harder than the last, and then an editor to make your own game. And it's still available free online, Rocky's Boots. You can look up Warren Rocky's Boots and you'll get it. It's in Apple II emulation mode, so it's extremely crude looking, but it's incredibly powerful learning. And when we showed it at Xerox Palo Alto Research Center, somebody was looking for the umbilical cord to the mainframe. It was the first time they knew a microcomputer in 48K could do something so significant. And many people thought it was the best software ever made for children, including Alan Kay, who was an Apple Fellow. I'm proud of this one that we built it in 64K and it wouldn't fit in 48. And I said, why don't we write over the operating system? He said, you can't do that. And I said, oh, yes, you can. So they did that to make it fit in 48K. InfoWorld was the most important computer magazine at the time. It was a newspaper. And they wrote in there, if you have an Apple II and you don't have Rocky's boots, it's like having a toaster without bread. IBM bought our whole product line because of it, and we were really well launched. Leslie Grimm was a teacher aide in Mountain View, and I got so many calls from people, but I saw Leslie because she had something to show. She said that she had had some things. So she brought in Mobtown and Bumble Games, and she wrote Rita Rabbit when she was with me, and that's where that program came from. Teri Perl used Warren's graphics utility to design Gertrude's Secrets and Gertrude's Puzzles. They're probably also available in Apple II emulation mode. They're really simple, but they had the advantage that there's really a progression through the game as you go forward. And also everything is playful all the way along, so it feels more like play, but they're really learning something powerful. Now a lot of the stuff that's out now is more diddly. It's like really not getting anywhere. So I'm hoping that people move more to building across concepts and building their literacy. So every program we made had an editor to let kids design their own game or extend the game within the parameters. All had the same input-output standards, and all went from easy to hard, and we tested everyone with 300 children, and that was in 1980. Regis McKenna arranged amazing PR for us. That was the people who did Steve Jobs' press to make him so famous. And we recruited Marcia, who was the vice president of that company, to be the CEO of Learning Friends, Learning Company. And then she raised, with me, $2.9 million with New Enterprise Associates as the lead. And kids helped create all the programs. This little girl sitting down is Corey Grimm, Leslie's daughter. She did all the graphics for our first program. She went to the Galapagos twice on her royalties and also to Stanford. And she's a computer graphics artist today. The other little girl is Tasia. She's in her 40s now and is doing Tiny Planets with me. I have kids that stay with me for decades, which is totally fun. I bet you know about that. When they grow, do any of you have kids that come and see you that you know as when they were younger? Yeah, a lot of nods. So some nice things happened along the way. Fisher-Price heard that we were, Chris Surf works with AWE, and he took me to the Muppet Mansion. I met Jim Henson, and he brought Fisher-Price executives to see me. They said, I said, you don't look like I pictured. And they said, I know, people think we're little Fisher-Price people with round heads. And they were vice presidents. They took me to the Four Seasons in New York, and they said, I opened the great big menu. They said, Ann, before you order, we want you to know something. You see that dessert cart over there? I said, yes, I do. It's huge. They said, we're getting everything on the dessert cart. And they did. There's like, we just passed around every dessert. Anyway, they were a lot of fun. And they heard that Stanford's nursery school let me test our programs there. And they were so impressed because they run a nursery school and they test their own product. They tested this little phone early on. It's a very old product. And they found out toddlers pick it up and walk around with it dragging behind them. So what did they do? They put wheels on it. And so they gave every teacher at my daughter's nursery school every toy they wanted, thousands of dollars worth of toys. They sent a stack of catalogs and said, tell them not to just order one thing or to be nice. We mean everything they want. You know how much fun that is. So one of those nursery school teachers says, I remember when you came and I was so excited to meet you, and I said, your daughter needs some new shoes. And I was like, well, I'm going to have to wait because I don't have $14 for saltwater sandals. I was like, put everything into the company, and you know, she went barefoot a little while. Anyway, at the Learning Company, when we still had 3 people in the company, someone came from the special office of the president, and I had hired a CEO by that time because the investors want someone that cares about money the way I care about learning, which is understandable. And the president said, who are you seeing now? Because I was always talking to people. I said, the special office of the president. The president of what? The United States. He said, oh, okay. That's a picture of me with him. In my youth, I was about 40. I'm 67 now. and it's a thank you letter from him. I influenced the Office of Naval Research, the Army, the 15 foreign governments. I've done a lot of influencing just with people coming in because we're doing something interesting.